They're rubbing sunscreen on my hands. Someone's grabbing a cardigan. From a distance, we look like the perfect family under a striped umbrella on the sparkling shore of Lake Michigan. But I'm Helen Peterson, 78, and here's the truth that's splitting my life in two. It's my children, Richard, Kate, and Linda, who have been quietly measuring my pulse, my medication, my willpower, and plotting my disappearance. A balmy afternoon, a sparkling lake, and a text message waiting to shatter it all. My late husband, Robert, always kept a saying over his coffee pot: the worst storms are preceded by calm skies. I'm thinking about that when the phone in my purse buzzes. Go quietly. Don't tell your children. The words freeze the screen. A second text follows. Emergency. Your life depends on it. Red car. Parking lot. Trust me. And for half a minute, all I could hear was the crunch of sand and my own breathing. On any other day, I might have laughed, pointed the screen at Richard, called it a hoax. But instinct, which ran deep in my mother's blood, told me to get up. I need to go for a walk, I said. It's too sunny. Kate reached for my elbow. Linda's fingers searched for my pulse. Richard's smile was concerned. "Want to come?" I shook my head and tucked the phone into my palm like a secret. I walked along the beach to find a hiding place, then turned toward the parking lot and counted my breaths. The red car was waiting, the engine off. Sarah Evans, Richard's housekeeper, was behind the wheel. "Mrs. Peterson," she said, swallowing the name. "Helen, please get in the car. I know what this looks like. If it wasn't life and death, I wouldn't have called." "Live or die," I repeated. I slid into the passenger seat. "I'll tell you everything," Sarah said, looking in the rearview mirror. "But first, your children can't see us together." She pressed the phone into my hand. On the screen, a bank transfer authorization with my signature, a power of attorney with Richard's name on it, a will with my charitable legacy neatly crossed out. The date, last week. "I remember the barbecue," I whispered. "They said to update the insurance." "The wine had film floating on it," Sarah said. "I found an empty pill pack in the trash. Bromazepam, 6 milligrams, and a dropper bottle with a clear residue." I looked it up, confused, sleepy, suggestible. That afternoon, I drifted, pleasant and heavy, and signed where the yellow cards told me to. I called it trust. Trust, when the hands guiding you are not your own, is a cliff. "There's more," Sarah said, pulling up a voice memo. Richard's voice, low, hurried. "I can do this, Vince. She'll cooperate, or we'll make it look easy. A fall, a heart attack." Another voice, flat and smiling. "Thursday, Richard, 380 plus toll. Vince, the razor cutler." The sun was still shining. "Why are you doing this for me?" I asked. "Because you did it for me," Sarah said. "When Valerie got pneumonia and Richard cut my hours, you wrote me a check and called me family. Good people shouldn't be prey." We sat while the summer roared around the car. What should I do? "We're going to the police. Detective John Miller looked into the forged documents. He asked me to take you without your kids knowing." She pointed. "I'll drive." Mothers are made of second chances. We hand them out like cookies, even to grown children. But Sarah's hands were shaking. Mine were starting to shake too. "Drive," I said. As we drove, I saw my umbrella. Kate covered her eyes, searching. Linda held my cardigan. Richard paced back and forth with his phone. I held my hand to the window. None of them saw. The police station smelled of coffee and metal. Detective Miller had the matter-of-fact expression of a man of his word. He wasted no time. Blood draw, haircut, screenshot of Sarah, short sentences that didn't hide the truth, forged documents, Loan shark, deadline, life risk if the money doesn't go through or if I ask the wrong question at the wrong time. I'm not here to frighten you, Mrs. Peterson, he said. Urgency saves people. If I were your mother, I asked, what would you tell me to do? Help us record them in their own words. We'll protect you. We'll be nearby. One conversation, handled right, can close the jaws of this trap. Handled right, I repeated. Detective, they are my children. Saying children felt like a superstition, as if the word could conjure the babies back. I know, he said gently. That's why this hurts, and why it matters that you're the one who stops it. Sarah touched my sleeve. Helen, you saved me once. Let me stand with you now. In evidence, certainty wore ordinary faces. A bottle cap with a fingerprint, a time-stamped text thread. My name copied too perfectly on the wrong line. I wanted to be sick. Instead, I breathed until my shoulders lifted. Do you believe in warnings, detective? I asked. Old woman warnings? Sayings? I believe in listening, he said, and in plans. So we made one in 3 sentences. I would return to Richard's house before sunset, the picture of a shaky woman who scared herself with a dizzy spell. I would ask ordinary questions with careful edges, and when the floor opened, I would let the truth fall out of their mouths and onto the record. If you were in my place, would you go back or run? I ask because telling this means I lived to tell it, but surviving the next hours demanded a quiet kind of courage, the kind that looks like staying. Richard's street is maple-lined, green light pooling on the pavement. As Sarah turned the corner, evening sifted gold across the lawns. She parked a few houses down. We don't rush, she said. We breathe. We let them invite us in. At the curb, I looked back toward the lake. The horizon was a straight, quiet line. Soft sky, I murmured. Hard storm. I took Sarah's arm. We started down the walk toward the house where my children were waiting and toward the thing I could no longer pretend not to see. Before we go deeper into today's story, please subscribe to Tangled Heart Stories and turn on the notification bell. Here, you'll always find tales of sacrifice, betrayal, and the twists that turn the tide. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below. Your own experience may echo in the next story we tell. I nodded, though my throat was tight. A mother knows her children's voices, even when those voices plot against her. Inside, the air smelled of garlic and polish. Richard's shoes clicked across the hardwood as he came to greet me. Mom, you scared us earlier, wandering off like that. You need to be careful. His words were tender, but his eyes measured me the way a butcher sizes a cut. Kate fussed over my cardigan, pinning the brooch I'd worn since Robert's funeral. Linda pressed a glass of water into my hand and studied my face. You look pale, she said. You should rest. I sat at the dining table where I had celebrated birthdays and Christmas mornings. I'm fine, I said softly. But I've been thinking about money matters, about the house, the accounts. Maybe I should get everything in order, so there's no confusion later. Richard leaned forward too quickly. That's wise. We've been helping already. Remember? You signed some of the forms. My heart thudded, but my voice was calm. Remind me. What exactly did I sign? Kate glanced at Linda. For a long moment, the 3 of them sat in silence, tension buzzing like a fly. Then Richard said, Mom, we only wanted to make things easier. Transfers, consolidations, nothing complicated. I forced a laugh. Easier? For whom? It was Linda, the youngest, who cracked first. Her eyes filled with tears. We had no choice. Richard owes nearly $200,000. Kate and I signed too. Vince gave us until Thursday. Richard's jaw clenched. Stop talking. But Kate pushed forward, her voice trembling. It was supposed to be painless, Mom. A pill. A slip on the stairs. You'd never know. And afterward, we could pay everything. We'd be safe. Safe, I whispered. By killing your mother. The room swam. The tiny recorder sewn into my jacket pulsed against my collarbone. A silent witness. Don't act shocked, Richard snapped. You've lived your life. We're drowning. This is the only way. I let the silence grow until every tick of the clock was a hammer. Then I asked the question I had rehearsed. What did your father teach you about storms? They blinked at me, confusion, irritation. He said the worst ones come on soft skies, I said. Today, the sky looked so soft. Richard's eyes narrowed. He leaned closer. His hand shot out, brushing my shoulder. His fingers struck something hard beneath the fabric. His face drained of color. She's wired. The word cracked through the room. Chairs scraped. Kate gasped. Linda wailed. Richard lunged for the brooch, yanking at the thread. I stumbled back. Richard, don't! He grabbed a half-empty bottle of wine, sloshing red across the table. Drink it, he shouted. If you love us, prove it. End this now. I froze. Kate screamed. Linda covered her face, and then the front door crashed inward. Police! Detective Miller's voice roared through the chaos. Officers flooded the room, boots, shouts, the gleam of drawn weapons. Richard dropped the bottle as hands seized his arms. Kate shrieked. Linda sank to the floor. In the corner, Sarah clutched her daughter Valerie, shielding the girl's eyes. It ended in seconds. The officers read rights, cuffed wrists. Richard spat curses. Kate sobbed for mercy. Linda whispered, I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I stood still, trembling, until Miller touched my shoulder. It's over, Helen. You're safe now. But safe is a fragile word. I watched my children led past me, their faces twisted, and I knew nothing would ever make me whole again. The house was suddenly silent after the storm of arrests, as though the walls themselves were stunned. The officers carried boxes of documents, laptops, and bottles sealed in evidence bags. Sarah held Valerie tightly, whispering comfort. I sat at the dining table, my hands trembling on the wood where moments earlier my children had mapped my death. Detective Miller crouched beside me. Helen, you did something extraordinary tonight. Most people would never have the courage to walk back into that fire. I looked at the overturned wine glass, red liquid crawling across the table like blood. I didn't feel brave. I felt like a mother who lost her children before the handcuffs ever touched them. The ride to the precinct blurred into neon and sirens. Sarah sat beside me, her hand over mine. Valerie slept against her shoulder, her small breaths the only proof innocence still existed in the world. At the station, Sergeant Baker walked us through the process. Your children will be booked tonight. Vince Cutler is in custody as well. With the recordings and the forged documents, the DA has enough to press charges for conspiracy to commit murder and financial fraud. Conspiracy to murder their own mother, I whispered. Say it plain, Sergeant. That's what it is. Sarah guided me to a bench. Helen, don't let their choice define your worth. You've given them decades of love. What they did tonight says everything about them and nothing about you. But grief has its own logic. I thought of birthdays, school plays, scraped knees, wedding vows. I thought of Richard on Robert's shoulders, Kate learning to braid, Linda whispering secrets into my ear at bedtime. And I thought of the same 3 voices, hours ago, planning my disappearance as though I were a line item on a debt ledger. The district attorney, Brenda Walsh, arrived late that night. Her heels clicked sharply against the tiled floor. She shook my hand, firm and steady. Mrs. Peterson, your testimony will be crucial, but the recordings speak volumes. The jury won't need imagination. They'll hear your children's voices plotting against you. I closed my eyes. Do you know what it is to hear your child plan your death? She hesitated. No, but I know justice, and I promise you, we will see it done. Weeks passed in fragments, interviews with prosecutors, consultations with Mr. Hayes, the court-appointed attorney who walked me through the labyrinth of legal filings. Sarah never left my side. Valerie drew me pictures, stick figures holding hands beneath rainbows. That's you, Miss Helen, she said proudly. You're smiling again? I tried. When the trial began, the courthouse felt less like a temple of justice and more like a battlefield carved in marble. Reporters clustered on the steps. Cameras flashed. Inside, the Peterson name, my name, was whispered in tones of scandal. Richard entered first, flanked by guards. His suit was wrinkled, his stare defiant. Kate followed, pale and taut, her hands clenched. Linda trailed, eyes downcast, her hair uncombed as though she had wept through the night. I wanted to rush forward, to embrace them, to scream, to weep. Instead, I sat, spine stiff, and let the chain of law carry them where it would. Brenda Walsh's opening statement cut through the room. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not about strangers or hardened criminals. It is about betrayal, children conspiring to murder the very woman who gave them life, all for money. You will hear their words, you will see their documents, and by the end, there will be no doubt of their intent. The defense tried. Mr. Hayes whispered that their attorneys would lean on desperation, on debt, on coercion from Vince, the razor cutler. They would paint my children as victims of circumstance, not villains, but recordings don't lie. The jury listened as Richard's voice filled the courtroom. She'll cooperate or we make it look gentle. A fall, a heart thing. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Linda sobbed into her hands. Kate buried her face against the table. I felt every eye on me. My heart fractured, yet some fierce spark flared in my chest. If you were me, I thought, would you forgive them or let justice speak? When it was my turn to testify, I rose slowly. My cane tapped against the floor, steady as a metronome. I told the truth, the text message, the whine. The documents, the voices of my children plotting in the house Robert and I had built. My voice broke once, but I did not stop. Mrs. Peterson, Brenda asked finally, why did you agree to wear the recorder? Why risk your life? I looked at the jury, at the gallery, at the faces leaning forward to hear, because silence would have killed me long before they could. I wanted the world to hear the truth, even if it was the last thing I spoke. The courtroom held its breath. After days of testimony, after motions and objections and sleepless nights, the verdict arrived. Guilty. Richard, Kate, and Linda, my children, sentenced to 15 years each. Vince, the razor cutler, 25. Outside, cameras clamored. Microphones thrust forward. Mrs. Peterson, how do you feel? I said only this. A storm passed. The damage remains. Sarah and Valerie flanked me, shields of warmth against the noise. We walked together into the sunlight. If you were sitting in that courtroom, would you have been able to testify against your own blood? Tell me in the comments, because no mother ever dreams of that day, and yet sometimes justice demands it. Grief did not leave in the patrol cars. It moved in, set its suitcase by my door, and followed me from room to room. The house sounded wrong, Robert's chair too quiet, the kitchen clock too loud, the hallway echoing with a past that wouldn't sit still. I learned small ways to live beside the ache. Open the blinds early, make the coffee strong, water the fern Robert once said was unkillable. It turned brown anyway. Sarah came most mornings, Valerie skipping ahead with a backpack of crayons and impossible questions. "Are you still a mom?" she asked one day, "if your kids are bad?" I held her small hand and said, "Being a mother is not a job you lose. It's a promise you keep, to do no harm, even when you've been harmed." Valerie nodded solemnly, as if we had signed a treaty. The property lawyer, Mr. Hayes, sat at my dining table with neat stacks of papers and kindly eyes. "We can unwind the forged transfers," he said, "but it will take time. We'll restore your charitable bequests, and we can establish a living trust that protects you from anyone acting without your consent." He slid a pen toward me. My hand hovered. "This is the honest way," he said. I signed. The air felt a little lighter. Detective Miller stopped by, too, not as a cop, but as a man who had seen storms leave wreckage. He brought me copies of a victim's resource guide, set them quietly by the sugar bowl. "There's a support circle," he said. "Caregivers, survivors of financial abuse by family. They meet at St. Gabriel's on Thursdays. No press, no gawking." I said I would think about it. That night I found the flyer again and smoothed its crease with my thumb. On Thursday I went. We sat in a circle of folding chairs under the kind eyes of a wooden saint, a nurse whose son had forged her signature, a widower whose niece had emptied his account after promising to help with online banking, a grandmother evicted by a grandson who needed space. We passed a tissue box around like a shared instrument. When it was my turn, I said, "My children are in prison. I am not celebrating. I am breathing." Heads nodded. That was enough for a first night. In the weeks that followed, letters arrived from the jail. Richard's handwriting clenched and slanted, Kate's careful and apologetic, Linda's looping and tear-blotted. I opened them because truth deserves daylight. Richard blamed Vince, the debt, the economy, my stubborn independence. Kate confessed and begged forgiveness in the same paragraph. Linda wrote like a child again. "Mom, what did we become?" I answered once, to all three. I believe in repentance that takes the shape of action. I believe in boundaries that keep people alive. Until your actions change, my boundary stands. In quieter hours, I spoke with Father Michael, who had once comforted me when Robert died. We sat on a bench outside the rectory as Midwestern summer softened into early fall. "Forgiveness is not amnesia," he said. "It is not pretending you were not wronged. It is a decision to refuse revenge and a decision to insist on justice." I held that sentence like a pebble, turned it in my pocket whenever rage burned too hot. You, watching this, might be wondering, could I forgive? Would I visit them? Would I cut them off forever? There's no answer that fits every life. There is only the boundary that lets you sleep through the night without fear. One afternoon, Brenda Walsh called with an unexpected proposal. "There's a restitution fund in play," she said. "A portion of assets seized from Vince Cutler's operation will be distributed to victims. Given your children's part in the conspiracy, the court is inclined to direct a share in your name. You have options. Keep it, donate it, create something with it." Her voice softened. "You're a woman who turns broken things into useful ones. I can hear it." That night, I stood in the old guest room where Richard once built model airplanes. The wallpaper still showed faint outlines where posters had hung. Rock bands, a college pennant, a future that never quite arrived. "Useful," I whispered. The word warmed my palm. I made a list. I crossed it out. I made another. What if there was a door people could walk through before they ever met a Vince Cutler? What if there was a place to explain power of attorney before a forged one appeared? What if there was a phone number you could call at the first insult, the first, "You're useless now," the first time your child looked at your wallet instead of your face? I named it Rose Harbor, for the hardy pink roses Robert planted the summer we paid off the mortgage, and for the harbor on Lake Michigan where we once danced to a terrible cover band and laughed until we leaned on each other like drunks. A harbor means safety. A rose means beauty that knows it has thorns. Both felt right. Sarah cried when I told her. You're building a home where people like me and my mother could have walked in without shame. Valerie asked if we could put a bookshelf at her height. We could. We rented a modest brick storefront a few blocks from the parish. 4 rooms, a ramp, windows that loved the morning. Volunteers painted. The support circle donated chairs. Detective Miller sent pamphlets no one had time to design and everyone needed to read. Brenda facilitated a small grant for security and consultation. Mr. Hayes offered free monthly clinics to review wills and trusts. Father Michael blessed the doorway with a quiet prayer that asked for courage without spectacle. On opening day, a woman in her early 60s stood in the doorway, isolating her courage to a single toe across the threshold. "I'm just browsing," she said, as if truth were clothing she might try on. Sarah smiled. "There's coffee," she said, "and someone to listen." We listened. A month later, a line formed before we unlocked. People came with shoeboxes of statements, with cracked phones full of texts that hurt, with stories they had never said aloud. We made files. We made referrals. We called the Attorney General when we had to. We called daughters and sons who wanted to help but did not know how. We taught phrases like, "My boundary is," and "I do not consent." In a city that often looked away, a little room started looking straight at the thing no one wanted to name. Family can love you and harm you, sometimes in the same breath. One afternoon, a woman with a sharp bob and haunted eyes took my hand. "He told me I was nothing without him," she whispered. "So I stayed and signed. And then one night, I watched your story online, and I heard you say you were breathing. I want to breathe too." I squeezed back. "That sentence is a key," I told her. "Let's find the door it opens." Not every day was brave. Some were practical to the point of boredom, photocopies and appointment slots, and a leaking coffee maker we learned to sweet talk. Some were heavy, phone calls that ended with sirens, restraining orders that needed guards to make them real. We failed sometimes. We wept. We kept the tissues in the same place on purpose. I held my line with my children. I did not visit during the first months. Through Mr. Hayes, I set conditions for any contact. Letters only. No manipulation. No requests for money. Accountability stated without the but that erases it. Kate learned fastest. Her letters began to say "I did" instead of "I had to." Linda's handwriting steadied. Richard remained a storm, apologies wrapped around anger, demands dressed as pleas. I returned each letter unopened when it broke the boundary we'd agreed to. Mercy without a wall is not mercy. It's surrender. As Rose Harbor grew, I learned to ask the room a question you might answer for yourself right now. Where does your yes end and your no begin? We wrote answers on sticky notes and lined them up on the wall like prayer flags. I will not sign without a second set of eyes. I will not be cursed at in my own kitchen. I will not be told my worth depends on my wallet. The wall looked like a garden of small rebellions. One evening in late autumn, Father Michael stopped by with a grocery bag. He handed me a Tupperware of soup and a yellowed book of poems. "You're thinner," he said, peering over his glasses. "Eat and then read." I laughed. "You're bossy for a man of God." He shrugged. Sometimes God needs a louder microphone. I ate, I read. The poem that stayed said, "We do not heal by pretending the blade was a feather. We heal by naming the blade and choosing not to carry it forward." I wrote it on a card and taped it to the office lamp. You might be wondering about the money, the restitution, my accounts, the house. Practical matters are a kind of mercy, too. With the forged transfers voided, my savings returned. The restitution from Vince's operation arrived in a sum that surprised me. I split it 3 ways. Seed funding for Rose Harbor's first year, endowed scholarships at the community college for adults over 50 returning to school, a fund at the parish for emergency rent and utility support for seniors. I slept deeply that night, the way you do after moving furniture into its right room. One afternoon near winter, the mail brought a letter from Chaplain Evans at the county facility. "Richard has requested pastoral counseling," she wrote. "He asked me to tell you he is learning to sit with the word consequence. He hopes one day to earn the right to ask your forgiveness, but understands he does not possess it." I closed my eyes and let the sentence sit. Earning is not demanding. Wanting is not taking. It was the first letter about my son that did not pull rage up by its roots. I do not know if you would open that door. Some of you would, immediately, because love keeps its arms outstretched even when the person coming toward it has hurt you. Some of you would never, because survival requires distance. My choice was a middle one. I wrote to Chaplain Evans and asked her to tell Richard that repentance is daily, and the door is not a door, but a window right now. Light can pass both ways, I wrote. We will see in time what grows. The day snow finally came to the city, Rose Harbor filled with the smell of wet wool and cinnamon. Valerie cut paper stars and Scotch taped them to the front window. Sarah brewed 2 strong coffee and 2 sweet cocoa. A man shuffled in, hunched, his coat shiny with wear. He took off his hat and held it like a confession. "My boy says I'm a burden," he muttered. "Says I'm better off in a place. He wants me to sign." He met my eyes. What do I do? We made a plan. We called Mr. Hayes. We printed a simple statement. I will not sign anything today. I will review with counsel. I am tired and deserve rest. The man exhaled. It's a start, he said. He folded the paper with a care that made me want to weep. That night, alone in my quiet house, I turned off the lights and watched the snow glow in the street lamps. I thought of Robert's saying, of soft skies and hard storms. I thought of the first text, the red car, Sarah's hands on the wheel. I thought of my children, not as monsters, not as babies, but as human beings who reached for money the way a drowning person grabs a throat. I set their photos on the mantel. I whispered their names into the dark. Then I went to bed, and sleep found me before the worry could. If you were me, would you build a harbor or a wall? Maybe the answer is both. A harbor with a seawall, built not to keep every ship out, but to keep the ones you welcome from breaking you as they enter. Tomorrow, I would unlock Rose Harbor again. Tomorrow, someone would cross the threshold for the first time. Tomorrow, I would pour coffee and listen and write down sentences that sounded like survival. The storm had passed. The work, quiet and ordinary and holy, had begun. Winter melted into spring, and with it came a gentler rhythm. Rose Harbor was no longer just a place. It was a pulse, steady and insistent. Each week, new faces crossed the threshold. Each week, someone left a little stronger, a little less alone. One evening, I found myself standing in the small kitchen of Rose Harbor, stirring a pot of tea. The window rattled faintly with rain. Sarah was in the office sorting files. Valerie colored stars on scrap paper. I heard laughter drifting from the support circle room, a sound I once believed I would never hear again. It felt like proof that broken things could sing. Months after the trial, the county chaplain wrote again. Richard had started working in the prison library. Kate was teaching GED classes to other inmates. Linda had begun attending therapy groups. None of this erased what they had done, but it hinted at change. The slow kind, the daily kind. I never promised forgiveness, but I promised myself I would no longer carry their crimes on my back. Boundaries do not mean bitterness, they mean breathing space. On the anniversary of Robert's passing, Father Michael joined me at the lake. We stood where the water touched the sand. "Do you feel lighter?" he asked. "I feel rebuilt," I said. "Not the same, but stronger." He smiled. "That's the quiet revenge, Helen. Living well, building something that outlasts the betrayal." I thought of my children's faces, both the children they had been and the criminals they had become. Pain and love coexisted, stubborn as roots under stone. I whispered their names into the wind, not to absolve them, not to condemn them, but to remind myself they existed, and so did I. Rose Harbor thrived. Seniors came with folders of paperwork, with questions about inheritance, with stories of children who loved them fiercely and others who treated them like burdens. Some left with resources. Some left with nothing more than a cup of tea and the relief of being heard. Both mattered. One woman, eyes wet with shame, said, "My son told me the best gift I could give him was to disappear." I took her hand and answered, "Someone once told me the same thing, in fewer words, but you are still here. That means you still matter." She cried into my shoulder, and I cried with her. If you're listening now, ask yourself, have you ever been silenced by the people closest to you? Have you ever been told your worth ended when your wallet emptied? You are not alone. Every story we tell here reminds us of that. At our first anniversary gathering, Valerie tugged my sleeve. "Miss Helen, will you say the speech?" I hadn't prepared one, but I stood before the crowd anyway. Faces lined with wrinkles, eyes lit with resilience. "This center," I said, "was built from betrayal, but it will live on in trust. My children tried to erase me. Instead, they taught me that respect is not given by blood. It is earned through love and kindness. And tonight, looking at all of you, I know family can be chosen." Applause rose, fierce and tender. That night, as the last guests left, I locked the doors of Rose Harbor and lingered a moment beneath the porch light. The sky above was soft again, but this time, I was not afraid of storms. I had walked through one, carried scars from it, and planted a garden in the wreckage. I turned the key, stepped into the night, and whispered, "The storm passed, the harbor stands." So tell me, if you were in Helen's shoes, would you have had the strength to confront your children, or would you have walked away? Share your truth in the comments. And if this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to Tangled Heart Stories. Here, every week, we speak of sacrifice, betrayal, and the twists that remind us justice still lives among us.